Hello everybody, welcome back to That's Football. And who really won between Manchester City and the Premier League yesterday? This story keeps developing, and I tell you what, if things carry on this way, this could be more interesting than the title race. Man City against the Premier League. Well, look, yesterday Man City came out and they were very much on the front foot saying that they defeated the Premier League. And then the Premier League came out and said that actually most of what we wanted, we won. And it's a little bit sad that we've lost a couple of things to Man City, but we'll amend the rules and they'll still be in place. And obviously, this has wider reaching impacts on the case of the 115, but that is still running. This is to do with associated party transactions where teams such as Man City or Newcastle could hypothetically use their rich owners to use some of their companies to pump money into the club legitimately, which is something that many people don't want. On that, very interestingly, obviously, I always think Man City, fairly or unfairly, are seen as the problem in football. 5 titles out of the last 6, favourites to win the title again, 115, and everybody uses 115 or 130 to have a pop at them. And yet, in this case, Chelsea, Newcastle, Everton, all acted as witnesses for Man City. So how do you feel as a Chelsea fan, a Newcastle fan, and an Everton fan that your club is there fighting for Manchester City? And this, to me, is just a fair reflection of football. As fans, we think we're listened to and we're important, but you may well be an Everton fan or a Chelsea fan that doesn't like Man City, and your club is backing Man City in the courts for their own benefit. Interesting, and this is what I mean about football at war. You've got Man City taking on the Premier League, suing the Premier League trying to sue Man City. Football's not going to be the same again. It's not going to be the same again because the Premier League is the league, the best league in the world, and the champions of the Premier League are taking on the Premier League and they're trying to defeat each other. So look, get your comments in on your interpretation. Just on the other hand, Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, Tottenham, Brighton and West Ham all were on the side of the Premier League, with Brentford, Bournemouth, Fulham and Wolves all offering support for the Premier League as well. So, I mean, some clubs are not named there, but it is a league that's ultimately competing with each other, trying to get the upper hand. I mean, I just feel sorry for Manchester City here because, they clearly, with 5 titles in the last 6 years and all the money they've pumped in, I mean, they really do need to get a few more rules in their favour, don't they? Against the might of the Brightons and the Brentfords of this world. I mean, Man City, it must be really difficult for them, winning all these titles and still needing more rules to help them out. But look, sarcasm aside, I genuinely think that when you look at a couple of, and I've not read it all, it's a massive document, but when I look at some of it, it actually makes a bit of sense. Man City apparently put forward a couple of deals that they wanted to do that the Premier League didn't go back to them in time to review. They just sort of went no, and Man City couldn't amend them. And also, I think what Man City are saying is they don't get access to the reasons why it's being refused and the data bank that the Premier League have. So I think transparency, you don't want, regardless of what we think about Manchester City, the Premier League cannot be a dictatorship. There has to be transparency. They must be in charge. It is their league, but there has to be transparency, of course. So I think that obviously is a very, very important thing that has to be studied and looked into. I completely agree. But the wider issue is that associated party transactions cannot, and it appears will not, be abandoned. We cannot have a situation where a Newcastle or a Chelsea or a Manchester United or a Manchester City pump a load of money into their club through a company that they own or partly own at a price which is way above market value, because you're basically not money laundering, or some people would say it is that. You're basically falsely pumping money into your football club. And we don't want that. What we want is a Premier League that, look, we don't want Manchester City winning 6 of the last 7 Premier Leagues, which is what will happen if they win it this year. But if they are going to do that, we want it to happen in a scenario that is as fair as possible. And I think that when you've got rich owners, obviously they want to pump as much money in as they can. But the problem with it will be is if you've got one club doing it, winning it every year, pumping money in, that may well be fine. But if you've got 2 clubs doing it, the wages go up, everyone else falls behind. It just becomes boring. And I get why as a Man City fan, you're not bothered about fairness. You're not bothered about other clubs in a good title race. You just want to win, 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 win. But these rules do need to stay in place. And hopefully, the way I've read it, we will still keep these rules in place. There'll just be a little bit more transparency. And look, I'll put my hand up. If the Premier League have been a bit draconian about these rules and said to Man City, you're not having that deal and we're not telling you why, then ultimately they need to amend those rules. Yesterday, it was looking like these rules were just going to be binned off and it would be a free-for-all for chucking money into your club, which would be absolutely rubbish for football. So, look, tomorrow there might be a further development, but today it looks like that is the case. Man City have won a couple of smaller victories, but the war has been won by the Premier League on this particular issue. What does it mean for the wider 115? What does it mean for clubs like Newcastle? Well, look, I personally have said that it seems to me at the moment PSR and FFP are not quite working. I would not be opposed to every club in the Premier League being able to put in another £100 million a year. I don't think that massively changes anything because the transfer window was dead last summer. So as much as we're talking about, the 115, well, we're not. We're talking about football and clubs getting money into their football club. I think at the moment the financial fair play and the PSR rules are a little bit too tight. That's the worst transfer window we've seen. So if every club, and a lot of the clubs are basically saying to their fans, look, we have money. Well, look at Newcastle. We have money. We can't get it in. So I think there's a lot of clubs like that. Aston Villa are probably like that. Chelsea are probably like that. Maybe Man United are like that. Maybe certainly Man City will be like that. I think just knocking it up a little bit is probably not a bad idea. But it definitely needs looking at in my opinion. But we can't just tear it all down and hope everything's going to be okay, because it won't be okay. If you break the structures of this and just let it be a free-for-all for chucking money in, there has to be regulation in football. There has to be. What you don't want is corruption, and what you don't want is dictatorship. There has to be a fairness, and it may well be that on this, and it might shock people, that I think Man City may have made a couple of good points, but what it looks like hasn't happened is that it's all fell apart completely, and that structure will still stay in place. How it leads on to the bigger case, well, look, I mean, if this had all fallen apart, it would help Man City on the 115, because if it was found that having associated party transactions is fine, I think this is probably a lot of what the 115 is about. It's how did Man City go from being a lower league club in the Premier League to a club that was buying all these players when they didn't have the revenue? And fundamentally, we need to know that, because many fans, even before the 115 or the 130 or whatever we want to call it, many fans were always saying, how does a club that was just basically Brentford on revenue, not on attendances, or Brighton or whoever, or Everton or whatever, how does a club like that go from there to dominating world football with massive revenue when they didn't have the revenue? And that is because, in my opinion and many other opinions, they've injected money into that football club in ways that others can't do it. If City dismantled the APT, Associated Party Transactions, as unlawful, then that would help them in their court case. Have they dismantled it? I don't think they have. So things roll on. Get your comments in, smash a like on the video, and I'll speak to you on the next one.